Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tiesenghausen. June 7th, here are the main news stories at this moment. It seems that Girkin Strelkov's grim prophecy is beginning to come true. Russians are expecting a landing of the Ukrainian armed forces in Crimea. Remember that recent post? Just a few days ago, Girkin Strelkov wrote that Russians won't even have time to react before the Ukrainian armed forces start crossing the Dnipro and move to liberate Crimea. So the situation in Crimea is becoming increasingly threatening for the occupiers. First of all, the Ukrainian armed forces are cutting off the already limited escape routes from Crimea, disrupting logistics, and now yet another piece of bad news has arrived for the occupiers. The Chongar Bridge is closed after the strike. The local occupation authorities wrote, "Dear residents and guests of Kherson region, as a result of the overnight drone attack, the bridge deck near the settlement of Chongar was damaged. For safety reasons, traffic through Jankoy has been temporarily blocked. Vehicle passage is being routed through the checkpoint at Armyansk, but hardly anyone is traveling through Armyansk either. The roads are under the fire control of the Ukrainian armed forces and our drones. The trap is gradually closing." And I read some Russian analysts and war correspondents. And here's what I want to tell you. Russians are gradually beginning to realize what has happened. The growing fuel problem and the strikes on St. Petersburg have suddenly sobered some people up, and they've put two and two together. And they really didn't like what they came up with. They've really had their eyes opened. They realized that all these years, the air defenses in occupied Crimea were being taken out for a reason, that the logistical blockade of Crimea is not a randomly invented strategy, and that the gap in the air defense system in Crimea, through which our drones are now flying deep into the Russian Federation, is also no coincidence. That the monotonous and relentless destruction of oil refineries and depots can trigger a cascading collapse of a huge part of the front and the rear as well, by the way. That occupied Crimea, which Putin considered the crown of his achievements, will become that very point from which cracks will spread across the entire front. Ukraine was not delivering random strikes. All this time, Ukraine was building a strategic trap, and only now are the elements starting to come together into a single picture. And today, I've already seen several posts from Russian war correspondents and bloggers. They are suddenly starting to see the light. And this picture that they are suddenly starting to piece together, they don't seem to like it very much, because for Putin, Crimea is a sacred piece of land. Any developments around Crimea create an unsolvable dilemma for Putin. If he loses Crimea, then that's it. The entire narrative of the war collapses, the historical mission, all of that. But if he tries to hold on to it at any cost now, he spends precious resources, which he has less and less of, on an asset that produces nothing by itself but consumes a great deal. Perhaps the most important point here is that some Russian analysts have actually understood this. But people like Gerasimov, for example, will never report this to Putin because they're afraid for their own skins and realize that this failure will be pinned on them. Well, it's all clear here. Surovikin, by the way, can confirm this. And this means that the paper rat will keep driving itself deeper into a hopeless trap. Itself and, of course, Russia as well. Putin is always talking about some kind of historical justice, a mission. A perfect example of historical justice would be if the balding Spirocheat, who greedily swallowed up Crimea in 2014, got caught on this hook. So that my native Crimea would become an unbearable burden and the end of this giant vampire empire. As they say, it all began with Crimea and it will all end with Crimea. You know, there is such a metaphorical story about a monkey trap. In reality, no one actually catches monkeys this way, but there is this very vivid story. So, to catch a monkey, you take a coconut, drill a hole in it, and put some treat inside. The monkey sticks its paw in there, grabs the treat. With the treat in its hand, it can't pull its clenched fist back out. And that's how it gets caught. Of course, this is all metaphorical. Monkeys are actually much smarter, but I think this story illustrates the point very well. What is happening now with Putin and Crimea? That is, he shoved his crooked little paw with blue fingers in, grabbed Crimea, and that's it. He can't pull it back out. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important and you can do it right now. We're fighting against Putin's propaganda, and together it'll be much easier to do, so make sure to subscribe. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Ukrainian soldiers are performing an incredible feat. They stopped Putin's huge army, which surpasses the Ukrainian army both in numbers and equipment, but they stopped this army. And they continue to liberate their own land. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we continue raising funds for mobile command posts for our air defense forces, for our hunters of Shaheds and missiles, for several air defense units and the 152nd Jaeger Brigade, which is currently defending in the Pokrovsk direction. The soldiers have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
152 бригада і підрозділ повітряних сил України та канал Бориса Тізенгаузена починають збір на 2 командні пункти, щоб збивати шахеди над нашими містами і запускати дрони-перехоплювачі. Сума чимала, але тільки разом ми можемо дати ворогу по зубам.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Let's help our warriors, those who are defending our skies. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are monobank, private bank, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. There's always a QR code in the corner, which also leads to the donation page. That's in case you're watching me on other channels. By supporting our air defense forces, you are definitely saving someone's life. Every downed Shahed drone or missile is a direct contribution to saving someone's life. And thank you so much, I say this in every episode, for helping Ukraine and our defenders. Thank you very much. By the way, did you notice how drastically different this economic forum was compared to last year's? Well, I have to keep track of this one, and even the one before last, as part of my job. So, where did all of that from the last forum go? Now, all the world's brands will be lining up to enter Russia, and Trump is our friend again. Now life will be good. The gloss and pomp have disappeared. Did you notice that the forum is taking place against the backdrop of drone strikes and Kronstadt burning, and there's this completely out of it old man sitting there talking about some burning coal, about hazel trees? And this old man himself with empty wild eyes can barely get the words out. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of a deathly silence in the hall. And here's another video that sharply contrasts even with what Putin was saying just a few days ago, that Russia is confidently advancing along the entire front line and so on and so forth. Look at what he's saying now.
Если задали этот вопрос, я отвечу. На поле боя паритет, где-то у нас преимущество наблюдается на некоторых участках. Это то же самое касается и вот этой дальнобойной авиации такого самолетного типа. Ведь она же такого уж совсем большой угрозы не представляла бы, если бы вовремя принимали соответствующие решения и наращивали соответствующие возможности. Но это же низколетящие и медленно летящие цели. Правда, появляются уже и беспилотники с реактивными двигателями, но и это на средства ведения вооруженной борьбы в принципе купируется.
So that's how it is. Turns out there's parity on the front line. But you were saying something completely different just recently. Maybe, in fact, different Putin replicants have some uncoordinated versions. So this version started spouting nonsense about parity on the front line, while literally a day ago another one was saying that we're advancing on all fronts, that everything is about to happen. Well, speaking of everything is about to happen, here's some news for you. In occupied Sevastopol, the authorities are introducing fuel sales via QR codes. So Putin has played himself into a corner. Well, even with a QR code, there's no fuel left anymore. Basically, soon there won't be any fuel at all in Crimea. No fuel means no supplies for the southern group. No fuel means no delivery of ammunition. So no fuel means no reinforcements can be brought in. How can you fight without fuel? So, the governor of Sevastopol, Razvojayev, stated that the number of QR codes will be tied to the amount of fuel available for free sale. At the same time, Razvojayev himself wrote that on the first day, the QR codes ran out within an hour. Do you know why they introduced these QR codes? I was still wondering, what kind of QR codes are these and why? It's so they can at least somehow drive users into the National Messenger Max, because you can only get these QR codes there. You see, someone figured, let's make some money off the fact that there are these kinds of problems. Let's herd everyone into the national messenger Max. Well, actually, people aren't going along with it. And as you can imagine, those who don't have a smartphone, pensioners, or just people who still use button phones, they end up without gasoline. Well, there's no gasoline, but hang in there. You know what you could try? Try fueling up with stones from the sky, but that's just the beginning. It's going to get even worse, much worse. The denazifization of occupied Crimea is in full swing. The Middle Strike Unit of the Special Operations Forces struck oil facilities in occupied Crimea, specifically the Semikolodyzinskaya oil depot, which is located in the village of Lenina. That's 200 kilometers from the line of combat engagement. In general, the occupying forces use this oil depot as a transit point for storing and transporting fuel oil, diesel fuel, and something else, bitumen. Well, in short, our drones hit that place. This Lenina is located right on the Kerch Peninsula, about 40 kilometers from the Crimean Bridge, not far at all. Recently, literally a couple of days ago, our drones completely obliterated an FSB boat right near the Crimean Bridge, just 12 kilometers from it. So soon, Ukrainian drones will be operating over the Crimean Bridge as well, and after that we'll deal with the bridge itself. They also finished off the remaining parts of the oil terminal in Feodosia. There were 7 fuel tanks left at the facility, but in short, they got hit as well. So let's take a look at how it happened. I just completely lost my deep connection to people. Deep down somewhere there was still love in my heart. So I jumped soaring through the sky and suddenly realized with a heavy heart that I simply couldn't leave. I paid attention to the accuracy. At the end of the video, the drone hits almost the exact same spot on the tank as the previous drone did. Exceptional skill. Well, the Russians decided that they were the cleverest ones. The command of the Russian Dnieper military group gave the order to massively use civilian vehicles to transport fuel along the highway connecting Rostov-on-Don with the temporarily occupied Crimea. In other words, they will be transporting this gasoline in canisters using civilian vehicles. Postal vehicles, bread delivery trucks, trucks for food and medicine. Basically, they decided to outsmart Ukrainian drones. Well, we'll see who outsmarts whom there. Let me just remind you that these actions by the Russians are a deliberate use of civilian infrastructure by the military and an attempt to disguise their logistics. In other words, this is a violation of the rules of warfare. Although, my God, what am I even talking about? Where is Russia and where are any rules of warfare? Putin at one time openly called for using civilians as cover. Remember, he said that Russian soldiers would put Ukrainian women and children in front of them. And then Putin said, we'll see how Ukrainian soldiers will shoot at their own women and children. A textbook scumbag, what else can you say? By the way, why do you think Putin isn't opening the Crimean Bridge for transporting fuel tankers? That would be the last desperate move. I think those tankers would go down together with the bridge. But still, there are places in Russia where petroleum products are in abundance. For example, on the beaches of Anapa. And here, Vice Prime Minister Chernyshenko was asked, what about the fuel oil on the beaches of Anapa? Do you know what he answered? He reassured all Russians. He said, the sand there is cleaner than on the French Riviera. He said this in an interview with the TASS General Director at the forum. Well, you know, when it comes to the French Riviera, the Vice Prime Minister probably knows best. I think he'll be vacationing there with his family, so as not to take up space from ordinary Russians on the beaches of Anapa. You see, the more a Russian official claims to hate everything Western, the more he actually uses it. The more he hates it, the more he uses it. Resorts, cars, smartphones. As they say, the official rides a G-Wagon while the enemies are in America. Don't forget that, Russians. And by the way, Putin is apparently trying to pull the last remaining trump cards out of his sleeve. He has attacked the Chernobyl zone again. In Chernobyl, a Russian drone struck the spent nuclear fuel storage facility. This was reported by Energoatom. Let me quote. As a result of the enemy drone strike at the centralized spent nuclear fuel storage facility, the container reception building was partially destroyed. A fire covering an area of 40 square meters was quickly contained and completely extinguished. There were no casualties among the staff. Well, you know, Russia is acting here according to a long-established pattern of second-order nuclear blackmail, not using weapons, but demonstrating a willingness to threaten with the very logic of a nuclear catastrophe. In other words, the mechanism is simple. They create a controlled sense of alarm, strike in such a way that there is no actual radioactive release, but so that the word Chernobyl once again appears in European news, so that somewhere in European capitals someone says, what if next time it really does happen? Of course, this is primarily aimed at our Western partners. This happens again when conventional trump cards have been exhausted. But you know, Putin has threatened nuclear weapons and strikes on nuclear power plants so many times that, in my opinion, no one takes it seriously anymore. We've been through this fire more than once already. So old Kabayev is trying to make weak threats again, but it doesn't really work. Just so you understand where the Russian Federation is heading, in St. Petersburg, they've installed an attraction called Oreshnik in an amusement park. It's designed in the shape of a rocket, painted in the colors of the Russian Federation flag. Basically, it's a classic ride, you know, a ring where people sit, it goes up and down, but at the top they've attached a pipe, painted it like the Russian flag, and called this attraction Oreshnik. I don't know if it randomly falls onto garages or sheds along with the people riding it. That's just how their society is built. That's the foundation they've laid there, and they won't change. In other words, they won't change until Russia fragments. That's why the only way to minimize the start of another war, because they will definitely go to war again. Definitely, maybe not with Ukraine, since they've taken a real beating here, but somewhere else they will. So the only way to minimize the start of a new war is to fragment Russia into smaller states, deprive it of this mobilization potential, and strip it of its nuclear status. Then everyone can finally breathe easy. Of course, there will still be plenty of unhinged dictators left in the world, some of them with nuclear weapons. But here I think the whole world will truly breathe a sigh of relief, and that moment will definitely come. Putin will choke on Ukraine, choke and die, and Ukraine will slam the lid of his coffin shut, drive a stake through it, and bury it so deep that no one will ever find it again. Well, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's help our air defense warriors. Right now, they really need our support. They are protecting us. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.